Hey guys, we're going to try something a little differently for today's notes. Considering you're all working on your lab, I've uploaded our notes online so that way you can pause and start again the notes as you need to. So if at any point you need to pause this to go back to your lab, please do so, and then just come back to it and start where you left off. Also, this format allows you to rewind it if you miss something or fast forward if you need to, so you can ensure that you complete your notes to the best of your ability. These notes are going to go in your notebook on page 50. So right now I'd like everyone to open their notebook to page 50 and write down the title and today's objective if you have not done so already. The title is Aerobic versus Anaerobic Respiration. We've actually already started talking about aerobic respiration the past couple days in class, as we've talked about cellular respiration. Typically, when someone says cellular respiration, they're referring to aerobic cellular respiration. But today you'll learn that there's also sometimes a cell or organism will use anaerobic respiration to power their cells. Today's objective is 2.f. Once again, make sure to write this down on page 50 as I'll be checking that so you can get it stamped today. 2.f is use data to compare aerobic and anaerobic respiration. Luckily, you guys have already started this by starting your lab and measuring your balloon. You'll be collecting your data through this experiment, and then by the end of today, you'll be able to compare that data to determine whether or not the yeast is performing either of these types of processes. So let's go ahead and start with aerobic respiration, as that's the one we are already pretty familiar with. Once again, if you have to pause at any time, please do so you can complete taking down your objective or the title. But I'm going to move on to the what for aerobic respiration. Let's break down the words aerobic and respiration. Aerobic means with oxygen. Respiration, as we've discussed before, is breathing in and out. So aerobic respiration can happen when an organism, or more specifically a cell, can take in oxygen in order to perform the process of respiration, creating energy for the cell called ATP. As we've previously discussed, the where is in the mitochondria. As many of you guys know, this the powerhouse of the cell. This is where ATP is created in most aerobic conditions, most conditions where there's oxygen available. If we look at the reactants for aerobic respiration, once again, that's when we've previously talked about cellular respiration, we were referring to aerobic cellular respiration. The reactants are oxygen and glucose. Like we talked about in the last slide, aerobic means with oxygen, so of course oxygen is one of the reactants. The products of aerobic respiration, first off, it produces a lot of ATP. And if you played any of the online games or simulations earlier, you would have seen that aerobic cellular respiration specifically creates 38 ATP molecules for every glucose molecule that goes into the process. That really helps your cell by providing a lot of energy for all those cellular processes. The other two products are the byproducts, things that are released but not necessarily the main product. These byproducts include carbon dioxide and water. Let's now compare this to anaerobic respiration. First, what is anaerobic respiration? Anaerobic, if you look at the word, actually includes the last word we talked about, aerobic, which meant with oxygen. So if you add the AN to the front of that word to make it anaerobic, it means no oxygen. So this respiration occurs when there's little to no oxygen available to the cell. This process, though, happens in a slightly different location. It happens outside the mitochondria, so other places within the cell, but not within the powerhouse of the cell, the mitochondria. So it's a slightly different location than aerobic respiration. The reactants are also slightly different. Remember, we just said that anaerobic means no oxygen, so that won't be one of the reactants. The only reactant in this process is glucose. Because glucose is the only reactant, the products are slightly different as well. The first product is still ATP, but it's much less than the amount of ATP produced in aerobic respiration. So that is one big disadvantage about anaerobic respiration. The cell produces less ATP using this process. Of course, CO2 is still also produced, but the last product is also different. In anaerobic respiration, a cell will either make or produce lactic acid, such as the case with your muscle cells when they don't get enough oxygen, or some other organisms produce ethanol when those cells do anaerobic respiration. And this process is called fermentation. I'm now going to show you guys a video that explains this again in a slightly different way. It also goes into more detail about why a human cell might use aerobic versus anaerobic respiration and the advantages and disadvantages to both processes. Please go ahead and watch the video, and as you do, on the bottom of your notes are 3 questions in a box. These 3 questions are based on this video, so be sure to answer them as you watch the video, and the whole note sheet should be complete by the time we glue it in at the end of this notes set. So I'm going to go ahead and play the video. Feel free to pause and rewind as needed, and then I'll come back to you guys in just a couple minutes. All right, enjoy.
Your body requires energy to do all sorts of different things, such as muscle contractions, transmitting nerve impulses, growth, protein synthesis, active transport, maintaining a constant body temperature, and all of this is required in the form of a chemical called adenosine triphosphate, also known as ATP. This is provided by a process called respiration, and this happens inside of animal cells, as well as plant cells, in little organelles called the mitochondria. Glucose is provided by your food and oxygen is provided through breathing, and a whole series of complex chemical reactions take place, but the result is carbon dioxide and water are produced. In that process, energy is released. The word equation for this is dead simple. You just plug in those things that we've mentioned going into and out of the cell. Glucose plus oxygen goes to carbon dioxide and water. And this process is specifically known as aerobic respiration. Now, sometimes under some circumstances, this oxygen is not available in as ready supply as your cells need it. For example, imagine you're doing a sprint and your breathing rate will increase, so you'll be taking deeper breaths, but you're still not going to get as much oxygen as you necessarily need. If that oxygen is not there, these products are not going to be released. This process of aerobic respiration is not going to progress. The alternative is that in the absence of oxygen, glucose will be converted to lactic acid, and in the process it will release a very small amount of energy. The word equation for this is, again, very simple. Glucose goes to lactic acid, and this process is known as anaerobic respiration. One problem associated with anaerobic respiration is something called oxygen debt. The lactic acid that's being produced is toxic and it must be broken down. This breakdown of lactic acid requires oxygen. And so, after you've done some exercise, you're going to have to repay that oxygen by breathing more deeply. So, you'll take deeper breaths even after you've finished this exercise. Let's look at the two compared side by side. We can obviously see that anaerobic respiration has the advantage that where aerobic respiration needs oxygen, anaerobic respiration can progress in its absence. but the trade-off is there's a very small release of energy by comparison, and while the products of aerobic respiration are easily released, for example carbon dioxide is easily removed via the lungs, oxygen debt is required to break down lactic acid. And let's think about how you could get assessed on this in an exam. What is the word equation for aerobic respiration in plants? Now this is a bit of a sneaky question because you might end up mixing up aerobic respiration and photosynthesis because it's specified plants. But what you need to realize is that aerobic respiration in plants is exactly the same as it is in animals. And so the answer is A. Glucose plus oxygen goes to carbon dioxide and water.
All right, guys, so let's go ahead and finish our notes. So make sure to answer the questions, the last 3 questions based on the video in the box provided. If you need to, you can go back and watch the video again or go back to other parts of the notes to answer those 3 questions. But now that we're finished with our notes, I want you to go ahead and glue or staple these notes onto page 50 in your notebooks. And once you're done with that, you can raise your hand and I will come around and stamp you off for your note sheet. Make sure to keep these notes out, your notebook open to this page, as they'll become very handy as you answer the review questions in your lab packet. All right, guys, good luck and move on to task number 2 when you are ready. Thanks.